if you want to kind of introduce yourself, Nathan, for the audience and the listeners, kind of a little bit about who you are as a coach, a human being, and also what your business looks like, that would be a great place to start.
Great, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Brinsley. Thanks for having me. And it's good to see some familiar faces here as well. It's lovely. I mean, I started my journey, my coaching journey. I think I begun to train as a coach at a development consultancy I worked at. But I think my coaching journey really officially began when I joined Animas and did the training at the school. So my name is Nathan Blair. I am the founder of a school called the Somatic School, coach training school, which we'll be talking about, I think, at length in this podcast. So maybe I won't go into that in great detail, other than to say that we train coaches to develop the skills they need to work with the body's intelligence, with the wisdom of the body in a online and in person in a coaching context. And so that's the business I founded in 2018. A little bit about me. I live in London. I'm not sure what to say about myself. I have a younger sister. I love, before I stopped eating gluten, I had a penchant for cheesecake, but that's sadly, I miss it greatly. I love music, and I'm an enormous fan of Taoism, which may come up throughout this in this podcast at some point. That's probably a little bit about me, just to kind of whet the appetite. But I think over to you, Brinsley. Let me know what else you're curious about.
Yeah, no, thanks for the intro. And I think it'd be nice to kind of expand a little bit on the title for the interview today, because it's building the Somatic School and then also tending to the organism of your organization. So I kind of like to hear a little bit about how you created that name and what does it actually mean.
Yeah, so interestingly, the building the Somatic School piece came from somewhere in the Animas space. Somebody had written that piece. So that. I mean, that pretty much kind of we're here to talk about a little bit about how I guess I went from being trained as a coach. I imagine we'll probably talk about this journey from working, training as a coach, working as a coach, and one-to-one coaching professional for a period, and then setting up a coach training school or academy or institute, depending on how you want to say it. So that's the building the Somatic School piece is really just, I guess, about that journey. The tending to the organism of your organization really, I guess, speaks to the way that this journey has unfolded for me, in the sense that it has felt from start to finish to be a very organic one. And in the spirit of somatic work, which is all about this notion that the mind is a body, the mind is an expression of the body, and vice versa. And this concept of the living organism or the human as an integrated whole, I apply those same principles to the way that we do business here at the Somatic School. And I think that that's something that, if we get an opportunity to talk about some of that, I'd love to share some of that perspective with listeners, because it perhaps might not be conventional in terms of like the way that the business is sometimes done. A lot of the way that we run business is exactly as many business owners will do that: taxes, etc. VAT, and other topics as well. But there's a great deal that we do that feels to us to be very special. Not unique at all, but special nonetheless. So, and that is about tending to the organism that is our organization. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so there's this parallel process of how you train and then how you also run your business, which kind of feels, I guess, really aligned with each other.
Sure.
Yeah. So we can definitely dive into that. But before we go there, and I guess that's kind of where you're at now, if we looked at that journey from where you were when you qualified with Animas, I think that was back in 2014.
Yeah.
What did that look like? going into private practice as a coach, and then, you know, latterly developing your coaching school. What does that journey kind of entail for you?
Yeah. So, you know, I went to a taster day with a coaching school that I don't think exists anymore. This was at a time that I was working at, as I mentioned, this leadership development consultancy, Lane 4. I was working at this consultancy and I learned about coaching. All the consultants were executive coaches. And for the first time, I think I had discovered something that felt like it aligned to my values, but had a way that gave me an opportunity to work in the way that I was hoping to. I studied psychology, and when I was studying psychology, this is prior to working at the consultancy, just before, it was my first job after graduating, was at the consultancy. So I studied psychology, and I've personally found myself moving away from a psychology of disease, disorder, and dysfunction, and towards an understanding of human potential and what helps people flourish and thrive. Part of my journey there, I think, had been through being diagnosed with ADHD, or ADD specifically, attention deficit disorder, for any listeners who aren't familiar with that, as a teenager, and taking medication for that up until my early 20s, where I began to search for sort of more natural ways to manage what I understood the symptoms of ADD to be. And I really began to grow in this belief that we're not, as individuals, we're not broken, we don't need to be fixed. That's my personal perspective, which is sometimes, you know, in you know, the paradigm of modern medicine, in particular in psychiatry, perhaps it might not hold that attitude. But, you know, this whole topic of, you know, like positive psychology and human flourishing and coaching is sort of the application of a lot of those principles that born out of the human potential movement in California and Esalen largely in the 60s, you know, and so when I discovered these consultants were doing this thing called executive coaching, I'd always wanted to work with people in a helping capacity, but I just, at that time, this changed later on, but at that time, I didn't feel like I was ready or felt like I had capacity to be a therapist, to work in that way. So I discovered coaching, felt very interested in it. And like I said, I went to this taster day, and the first time I did coaching, you know, a coaching practice, I just knew, you know, I was like, this is, I almost felt like, you know, in Chinese philosophy, they talk about this concept of li, which is like the natural patterning of all things. You know, like if you look in the grain of a word, or like the rings on the inside and things like this. And I almost felt like this was my, you know, my li in a way. It was like this concept of like, oh, I've really found what I'm supposed to be doing in a sense. And I later joined Animas, and I trained at Animas, and I worked as a coach for a little bit. And for me, the business of coaching, I didn't really love. I never fell in love with the business of coaching. I didn't get along with it so well. So like the process at the time I was trying to adopt was like going to events, a lot of trying to find clients by speaking to people, introducing myself, and that sort of much more in-person approach. And it was a lot of work, and I was booking in exploratories, and I would do the business of coaching very differently now if that were to become my kind of my primary source of income. But at the time, it didn't resonate with me so much. I couldn't quite get to grips with it. And I guess there's a lot to this story, but to kind of cut a bit of this short, I mean, I went away to America for a while. I worked at a company that was all about relationship and conscious sexuality, and you can't separate that topic from the body. You know, that's clearly there's a, you know, and it was there that I really had a first-hand experience, you know, how connected we are viscerally, at a visceral level. We're not as separate as we think. Our bodies respond in subtle ways to one another constantly. And I wanted to bring what I was learning there into the coaching space, but very few coach trainings at the time it's true even today. They touched on the body and embodiment very lightly, if at all. And so I started to train in some of these body psychotherapies, like focusing, Hakomi, authentic movement. I did some Gestalt training. I did some of that in America. I did some of that in the UK, and then in the UK, I was working for a period of time coaching, but again, didn't love the business of coaching, so wasn't doing it very successfully. Didn't have many clients. I remember at one point I had a mentor say to me, Nathan, if you're a coach without clients, are you a coach? It was like, if a tree falls in the wood and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? It was like that, but it burnt. It cut deep, that one. But that was my life at the time. I really wasn't working with a great number of clients. It's very opportunistic, very hit and miss here and there. And Nick approached me to talk about setting up some satellite organizations under the umbrella of Animas. And we spoke about this. And originally we were going to set up a school for relationship and couples coaching.
And this is Nick Bolton, the CEO of Animas, just for anyone listening who doesn't pick up that reference.
Thanks, Brinsley. Yeah, exactly. Nick Bolton. And for me at the time, I was actually trying to get some distance from that world because I'd been so immersed in it, and actually just had made the decision not to follow that path for a little while. And so I went away, and it didn't quite feel right. But then I came back to Nick and I said, look, this, there's a whole nother story for this, and I don't know if we'll have time to talk about this, but the idea for the Somatic School really came in quite a profound experience I had around the idea of it. But we can come back to that if it feels relevant. But yeah, anyway, I came back and proposed this idea, kind of pitched the idea of the Somatic School. It wasn't called that at the time, but somatic coach training. And then we set this up together actually before Nick went off and did took his sort of sabbatical. And then I took the school forward. At that point, Nick had said, you know what, I'm taking some time here. I want to. He just got married, had this canal boat. I wanted to just enjoy the fruits of it. I mean, he'd done such incredible work with the School of Animas, and really wanted to just enjoy the fruits of his labor in a way. And I had a couple of options. I could kind of throw in the towel with the Somatic School at that stage. It was only a couple of months in, it's early days. There wasn't much to lose there. Or I could kind of press forward and go for it. Take the leap and kind of step into the arena. And I decided to do the latter, and I'm eternally grateful for, Nick's catalytic intervention that kind of was the impulse that began this process. Because I don't know if I would have set up a coach training school if it hadn't been for that conversation. Although it was a vision of mine, I don't think I ever would have taken the real steps to do that. And here we are today. I guess that's probably brings us. It's a lot longer but I guess there's a lot to it. So,
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear you say that about you probably wouldn't have set the coaching school up, because when I was reading the bio, one thing that stood out for me was that this was the coaching school that you always wished existed, and I was wondering how that process worked for you, kind of figuring that out. Was it organic? Was it going with the grain, as you say, and it just emerged?
That is such a great question, Brinsley, because I had signed on for a number of trainings in what I was hoping the idea I had about what somatic. So I'd always been interested in somatics. And again, for people who aren't familiar with somatics is a field. It's a broad field, and the term somatics can be used in lots of different contexts. But often when I speak about somatics, I'm talking about somatic psychology. And that really is this notion of, like I said before, the mind is an expression of the body, vice versa, this concept of the human as an integrated whole. If you're working with someone's psychology, as coaches do all the time, but you're not acknowledging the body, you're only working with part of the picture. We are a whole, and that's one piece of it, an important piece, but only a piece of it. And so it's about having that integrated approach, a holistic approach. And in the truest sense of the word holistic. And I'd try to seek out a training that would kind of fit the impression I had about what I wanted to create. It's like, sometimes you kind of have an idea about something, and then you're looking out in the world to try to find it. Ultimately, what I found was I couldn't find what I was looking for, certainly not in the world of coaching. There was one coaching institute in California run by someone called Richard Strozzi Heckler that never resonated with me. It's based on a martial arts form called Aikido, and it's very masculine in its approach, generally speaking, and it just didn't quite resonate, especially after I'd worked at this organization that really taught a lot about this notion of the feminine, and the language of the feminine being the kind of the felt sense, the bodily sensations, the kind of experiences we have in the body that give us that kind of imply, go that way, not that way. This is right. This feels wrong for me. That kind of thing. We experience that in the body. And so I was trying to look for something that was perhaps more yin than yang. First of all, had to do with a more bottom-up approach. Had to do with a much more of a case of deep listening to the body, sort of not say, rather than a kind of top-down somatic approach, which might be, I want to feel a certain way, so I put my body into this position. I want to achieve this, so I'll do this with my body. I'll create this somatic practice. To me, that's a more top-down approach. I was seeking a much more bottom-up way of working. And I even did a coach training with this organization I worked at, the relationship and sexuality organization. And I was expecting it to bring in the body in this way, and it just didn't. It was very, sort of like the coaching aspect of that training was still a very kind of traditionally cognitive mental meaning making approach. And so when I started training in body psychotherapy, and I was learning from the body psychotherapist, I found exactly what I was looking for. And learning these skills, I realized that there was a serious gap here to bring in these more bottom up, perhaps more yin style, perhaps more, some might describe that as a more feminine or receptive way of working, and then bridge that or marry that up with the deep and rich understanding I had of the coaching skill set and the coaching paradigm that I developed massively here at Animas. I also trained as a coactive coach, and so I really understood coaching, and then was able to bring together these skills. When the inspiration to create Somatic School emerged, it was this kind of bringing these worlds together and creating the coach training that I've been searching for but couldn't find. And I often say this to people sometimes, just to wrap this piece up, which is that, sometimes I'm only like when I used to do the sales calls at the Somatic School, I'd be on the phone to someone, and occasionally I get the sense from someone that what they were looking for didn't actually exist, as they started to tell me about how disappointed they were, and even this didn't feel like a fit. And I'd sometimes say to them, maybe it doesn't exist yet. Maybe it's you who needs to create this. Maybe you've gone from a place of consuming information, like a learner, consumption, to a place to now it's about creation. And sometimes we're just kind of full on information when we go to these trainings and things and go, that's not quite it. That's not quite what I'm looking for. Maybe actually it's your kind of dharma to create the thing you're not able to find out there, and essentially that's what we did with the Somatic School. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so interesting to hear. There was so much in there. And I think it'd be really interesting to touch on that profound experience you mentioned earlier, but we could go in two different directions. And I think what we'll do is we'll stay on track with kind of building the Somatic School. Yeah. And then perhaps we can go there later, kind of towards the end of the interview, if that's good for you. So something I was really curious about in that journey before we jump into sort of building the school itself is, did you ever create a successful independent coaching practice? Because you were in this stage where you were trying to, and then this opportunity arrived via Nick. What was happening there for you?
I would say I was kind of, it was a sort of a good enough coaching practice. The coaching I was doing was great. My time with my clients was wonderful. My client or customer acquisition process was lackluster, to say the least. It just wasn't, I just was no good at what I was trying to do. The lesson learned essentially was that I was trying to build a coaching practice in the way that I could see other people doing it. For example, I read The Prosperous Coach. I got, a classic, right? It's the Bible, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Works very well. In my opinion, I think that's a great approach if you're a high ticket coach. You spend a lot of time in these conversations. And then when you do get a coaching client, and this is just my opinion, take what you like and leave the rest. But I have quite a bold opinion about this, which is that if what you charge your clients is a very large sum, such that after all those conversations, just one client pretty much covers you for 6 months or something like that, to me, that justifies the approach well. Of course, there's a lot you can learn from the Rich Litvin approach that you could apply even if you're not a high ticket coach. But this whole approach of kind of meeting people, I also was reading Michael Port's Book Yourself Solid and things like that. And I was out there as meeting people at parties. I was inviting them into exploratories. It was just a hustle. Now I know if I were to build a coaching practice again, I would do it totally differently. For me, what works well, because I like public speaking, I would never describe what I do as public speaking because I don't really like being up on stage on my own, kind of speaking to a crowd. I like training and facilitating a lot though. And if I were to do it again, I'd do a one-to-many model where I'd organize workshops or small trainings, perhaps low cost. I'd run those and I'd do it in a way where up front they knew that at some stage I would talk about my one-to-one coaching practice or other packages that I offer. And then at the end of the event, I would tell them all about my coaching work and offer them an opportunity to express an interest and have a follow-up with me. So I do a one-to-many model. And from those workshops that I'd enjoy facilitating and running, I then have people who had already bought into me, got a good feel for me, then come to me afterwards with expressing an interest, and then I follow up with those people in exploratories, and that would work well for me. But that ship has sailed. I'm long past that point of having a need to do that. I don't require. The Somatic School itself is my business. Although I still do one-to-one coaching on a regular basis, clients come to me now because I'm the founder of a somatic coach training school, rather than having to go do that kind of more active outreach. So to answer your question, I was pretty pathetic in terms of running a coaching business, but I've learned a lot along the way that if I were to do it again, I'd probably do it pretty well. I'd suggest I'd probably do it. Yeah, I'm sure I would definitely have a good stab at it, and I'm sure I could build a business system that would work consistently because I've done that with the Somatic School, and a lot of the same principles apply.
Yeah, thank you for answering the question as well, because I did wonder what you were going to say, what you would have done differently. So I get this sense that you've kind of been on this journey and you've looked at different trainings in California, the UK, Animas Coactive, and you've decided to create this training that didn't exist, but that you knew you wanted to create based on going to the trainings and they're just quite not hitting the nail on the head for you, as well as having this journey around creating your coaching practice and kind of linking up with Nick. Let's focus on kind of the building the business element and this tending to the organism of your organization. Do you want to give us kind of a little bit of a flavor to what it was like to create a training program and a training faculty? Because most of the coaches on Coaches Uncaged, they're coaches, mentors, consultants, but we don't really have anyone who's actually created a training provider in the same mold that Nick has, where we're training people to deliver a skill set afterwards. So it'd be great to hear about that. Yeah,
not yet. Maybe this podcast might inspire a few to do that. It's a wonderfully rewarding experience, because if somebody has a niche or an interest or a particular angle on their coaching work that they'd like to share for others to learn, adapt, and do the same with, then it's for me, it's an incredibly rewarding journey to take people for that. So to answer your question, funnily enough, I think this actually ties back into that moment of inspiration in terms of about where the idea of the Somatic School came from, and then the process of building it kind of follows on from there. So if I start there, basically, I was sat at home thinking about this concept of building the Center for what were we going to call it? The Center for Relationship and Couples Coaching. I'm thinking, it doesn't inspire me. It's not quite right. But thinking, I really should do that. So like I was shitting all over myself that evening. And I was brushing my teeth and I was listening to a video by someone called Michael Beckwith, who's actually he's a, what would you call him? A minister or something at this interfaith the sort of interfaith, I don't know if you call it a church or something, in California, in LA. I learned about him through a friend of mine, Reverend Joanne Coleman, who I met in California while I was there. Told me about this place at Gateway, told me about Michael Beckwith, and I was listening to this video, and it was all about asking better questions to discover, to discover your gifts, you know, the gifts that you have to give to the world, or something like that. It's like, you know, life purpose, life vision thing. And in it, he made this distinction between what a lot of people do when they're visioning, which is kind of what he described as visualizing. So he said, when a lot of people are visioning their lives, what's their vision for their life? They visualize what they want. And in his opinion, visioning was actually a process of asking questions and waiting for kind of some form of insight, inspirational guidance. And so he was inviting on this video, and I can share the link if any of your listeners might want to listen to it themselves, because maybe they'll have a similar experience. But they're asking questions like, you know, what gift am I to give the world? You know, what is trying to emerge in my life? What is the vision for my life? He would use language like this that might be polarizing for some of your listeners, but like, you know, what is the universe seeking to express through me? And what idea is the universe trying to make as my life? That's this kind of language. And then afterwards, Michael on the video invites us to ask these questions and then just listen and have this moment of pure listening, without judgment, censorship, just see what comes. And I tell you, Risley, it was a profound moment for me, because it was almost in that space of listening, the kind of disparate threads of my life up until that point kind of came together, you know, all into this culminated into this, you know, the inception of the somatics, the idea of the somatic school. And it was almost like the whole, and this might sound a bit far out or far-fetched to some of your listeners, but it's almost like the blueprint for the school, kind of, it's like a download. I felt ecstatic, like literally I felt euphoric in that moment. And it was really incredible. And how this relates to building the business is that it's since that point, it's almost been what I've been trying to do, and this ties to tending to the organism of your organization, which is that I've been trying to basically do that blueprint justice. Does that make sense? So it's like I'm working in service of that. So that thing that I call the somatic school is almost like a living entity in itself. And I'm here to tend to it like a groundskeeper or a gardener, or even like, you know, in the beginning, it was almost working like a midwife to kind of birth this thing into being. And so building the business has been, you know, I think one of the things I've noticed is there's been a constant balance between effort and surrender in a way, or how can I put this? A different way of putting it would be, yeah, like sensing and tuning in, and then kind of like courageous action. So when Nick said, "Hey, you know, I'm going to take some time. You know, I'm out of the somatic school just because I want to, you know, take." This is something he wanted to do for himself, which is completely understandable. And at that time, you know, it was scary. I felt like I was like ship creek without a paddle. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do this. And so a couple of things I learned was that like nobody does anything alone. Like even when I'm on my own, I'm still trying to seek some kind of guidance, you know, but nobody does anything alone, in my opinion. So I would, you know, reach out to people. Robert Stevenson was great support for me in thinking about how to pull my ideas together for the course. What he suggested to me was very helpful, and I hope it's helpful for your listeners, which was if you chunk up, you know, chunking, which you do in what do you call that module now? Paradigms, perspectives.
Paradigms, that's the one.
used to be called perspectives. I just remembered that now. I was trying to remember what it used to be called the other day. So, okay, so paradigms, you know, like the concept of chunking. I think you do that in that much. So anyway, chunking up, if at the highest chunk, what do you want your participants to receive from your training? Like, what is it you want them to gain at the end of it? When you take that chunk and you chunk it down from there, what are the components that sit under that? And if you were to chunk down again, what would be the components there? Eventually, what you want to get to is a point where those components could potentially be modules. So the point where you have enough of those components or enough of a logical kind of partitioning of the whole to make a modular course, if that's the approach that you want to go for. I opted for a modular training because that's what I knew from Animas, from CTI. It's all in modules, and then from that place, I would think, okay, great. So if that's the topic, what sits under that? And so basically, I had one big piece of paper, A3 paper. You know, did the chunking down. Then I had separate pieces for each of the modules, and then wrote what would need to be under each. And of course, it's an iterative process. The other part of that, I think that is important to say that, which is that Nick's advice to me was to jump and then build the plane on the way down. And so what I did was my first task was to get the scaffolding. Then I wrote the course outline, put that online on the website, and set a date for the first course to begin. Then I would set the dates for all of the intro events, the events that would give the introduction to coaching events at Animas, the same concept. So an intro event to give people an idea of the course. Set the dates for those, got those in motion, met people, you know, started enrolling people on a course that I was still developing, right up until the point where I was actually running the course. I mean, this process is terrifying, but this is, I guess, what I mean by being this balance between inspiration and creativity and this courageous action. Because for me, I mean, there were many times where I was tempted to throw in the towel and had to be on the phone to somebody who's, you know, who was supportive, but also who held me in my kind of, you know, my most courageous form, and who would say, you know, like, you know, this is what you want. This is what you said you want. This is what you want to create. You know, how can I, you know, what do you need, you know, to be able to, I don't even know the questions they asked, or maybe they just kind of give me a kick up the backside and just help me to kind of recommit. It's a process of recommitting. So yeah, that, you know, it's an iterative process, like I said, and I was building it right up until the point that I was delivering it. And after that first delivery, get feedback about it. You know, the first one being a pilot at a lower cost. Because people are paying a pilot course fee, they're very willing then to, you know, that it's kind of like the deal here is that I'll seek feedback from you. You get it at a pilot price. It's like, great, I'm up for that. People love giving feedback. They love it. And then they'll, you know, how was it for you? What suggestions do you have? Implement some, apply some of those suggestions, the ones that made sense, and then, you know, iterate. And we're still iterating the course even now, and it's like been 4 years. You know, and it's an iterative process, but, you know, it's definitely pretty stable, as much as it could be. There's like nuances. I'm like a painter, just keeps painting over his painting. Eventually I've got to let it go, but, you know, it's just like these little nuances. There's always something you can find to refine. But yeah.
Can you ever let it go? I always think of the Formula One sports car. It's kind of this constant fine tuning and tweaking. That's always happening here at Animas as well. But yeah, I was terrified when you were sharing how you just booked the course and you hadn't even had the content there. That is courageous action.
Yeah,
it's interesting what happens to us when we're committed with anything like that, rather than making the decision to commit ourselves the other way around. Because it's kind of like you say, jumping off the cliff and building your wings on the way down.
100%. I mean, I would love to, and I don't think I can do this while still engaging, like we're still being in conversation with you, but I'd love to find this quote that actually my mum had on the fridge, and then just randomly one day sent me a photo, perfectly timed, at a moment when I didn't know this, and unknown to her, but maybe another part of her knew it, if you know what I mean. But like, unknown to her, I was on the edge. I was like, this is all too much. I'm you know, I don't, the thing is, it's never really too much. It's just that it's just those moments where you question your ability to cope. It's like, I don't think I can get through this. I don't think I'll survive this. It's obviously completely outrageous, because of course there's very few things that will annihilate you, but it's just the fear, you know. It's like, you know, I'm terrified, I'm scared. But the thing is, in those moments, it's like, for me, you know, knowing who to call or where to go to feel that sense of I am not alone and I'm supported. And I got this photograph from my mum that had this quote about commitment, and I'll never forget it. At that point, I made a decision. I said, I'm in this for the next 5 years, no matter what. So if even in the first 2 years, even if in the first year or two, only 1 or 2 people show up to my intro events, you know, these marketing events, I'll carry on, I'll continue, I'll find a way, I'll adjust my approach, I'll adapt, I'll pivot, I'll innovate to make this thing work, because I'm marrying myself to this for the next 5 years. It was that level of commitment. That made such a big difference. It took the pressure off, because the time frame went from the next month or two to the next 5 years. If I don't make it this year, I've got next year, and then the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that. You know, and it really helped a lot for me to make that decision to commit in that way. I don't know if in the show notes you can share this quote. It may be a better way to do it. I'll share it with you afterwards, but it is just stunning. It really feels true for me. To paraphrase, it's essentially the moment that we truly, genuinely commit, it's almost like all things begin to align in our you know, to our benefit, you know, in the direction of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I find that is true. It's just, you show up in the world in a way that just the world then wants to kind of like help you out. You know, it's like, yeah, it's so, I'll share it with you for your listeners. It's a beautiful quote.
Please do. And I can see Lip and Sashin nodding along as well. And I am too, because I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned about this kind of Taoism at the start of the interview, and I would get this real sense of kind of spiritual guidance, like you being in the bathroom, brushing your teeth, listening to this audio recording and having this profound experience, and this quote being sent to you. So yeah, I guess it really kind of ties in with what you were saying earlier about this being aligned with how you do business and how you train. Mm-hmm.
Interesting thing about that, Brinsley, is that you know, we have a core value of inclusion, and that means no personal part left out. And what that means is, though I am a deeply spiritual person, the way that we deliver our service is accessible, whether you're very secular, very secular, scientific to the nth degree, or deeply spiritual and live a life, you know, where, a monastic lifestyle you could be living in it, and it would, and the whole range, the whole spectrum in between, someone could easily feel at home in the training space we provide. That's very, very important to me. I don't want to alienate anyone, you know, or kind of exclude anyone from being able to experience the kind of the gifts of somatic work. Having said that, the way that we run the business is definitely has those threads running through. I mean, even our values have, they're kind of reflective of certain spiritual principles. You know, like for example, we have, you know, service. In giving we receive, you know, which is a spiritual concept. We have generosity of spirit. In receiving we give, which is basically like the concept that the way that we receive one another actually has the power to diminish, to kind of bring out the genius or diminish it in another person. You know, like we give a lot with how we receive someone. And then, you know, things like simplicity, inclusion, and so on. So, you know, there are definitely these spiritual threads, and we do a lot in terms of like when we do strategic planning, you know, like Sam, who's our program lead at the school, he shared with me that Otto Sharma, who created Theory U, spoke about this concept that businesses are moving from a plan and predict approach. Like businesses that are kind of at the kind of cutting edge are moving from the plan and predict model of doing business to a sense and respond. And when we do strategic planning, rather than going, here's the figures we want to, here's the budget, here's what we want to accomplish financially, how does this look strategically? How do we break this down to a plan? How do we deliver on that plan month off, quarter on quarter, etc.? Yeah. What we actually went and did was stayed in a tree house in Devon, like this, this Canopy and Stars is the name of a website that I recommend to absolutely everyone. It's Airbnb for these incredible outdoor escapes. It's incredible. Canopy and Stars. Look it up. So there was we booked ourselves into a treehouse and we did constellations for 2 days straight. So systemic constellations work, and that's how we created our strategy. And if you've done systemic constellations, it's a bottom-up approach. It's not going, okay, here's what we want. It's like what kind of insights and ideas come through this process and come through us and come to us in this approach. And it's how we try to do everything. We even have a concept, we even have a value called responsibility, which is essentially this notion that if it isn't resonant, it isn't right. And so I don't know how spiritual this is, but it's certainly somatic, which is essentially that if we don't feel a sense of resonance in the body, it's not right. Unless there's that felt sense of rightness, we don't proceed. And if there is a sense of dissonance, a felt sense of dissonance, or something out of alignment, we address it, we talk about it, and we try to get to a place where we feel resonant, and then we proceed from there. So nothing happens unless everyone in the room has that sense of that this is resonant, and that we're all on the same page, and then we move forward from that place. It's a very sensory way of doing business, as opposed to kind of like a more tap-down approach. So this is what we're doing. No, that's the plan. We're doing it. I know you don't feel good about it, but it's happening. And so tending to the organism of the organization is that it's like all members of the organization make up this ecosystem. It's like almost like the different organs within a body. And if the heart or the lungs aren't happy with it in any given situation, we don't have the health of the whole is compromised. And so the way that we do business is by constantly putting our feelers out into the whole business system, the whole ecosystem. And then is there anywhere that feels like it's not, that it doesn't feel right? Is there a sense of rightness, is there a sense of resonance, aliveness across the whole organization? Is the system healthy? And that's what we're tending to all the time, basically.
Nice. And I've got this vision of you in this kind of treehouse doing this constellation. What does that actually practically look like? Are you pulling out kind of props and putting them down, like a family constellation, for example? Can you kind of talk us through that process to create a strategy using the constellation?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Sam is the expert on constellations. Sam's gone through a number of constellations he's done a lot of constellations training and certified, and he now assists on constellations training. And so systemic constellations, the way that he does it is now I forget the technical term for this, but essentially this particular way of facilitating it is with floor markers. And so what we're looking at, say, for example, we need to make a decision about, let's say, moving from a co-facilitator model of training to a single trainer model. It's a simple example. Like, do we have one facilitator in the room, or is there always a co-facilitator? Is there always a co-lead? Yeah. So we put maybe co-facilitator as a marker, single trainer as a marker. Things like this, like the organization vision, the participants or the community, each of these is floor markers, and we step onto them. And at that point, as we step onto them, we simply sense what comes. For those of us who are a bit more cerebral in nature, it might be ideas, associations, or memories. For those of us like myself, who are a little bit more sensey-feely, more on the embodied side of things, obviously we're all of those things, but on the spectrum, I kind of trend towards that side a little bit more. I'm very much feeling what's happening in my body. It's like, oh, in this space, I feel a real groundedness in my feet. There's a real stability here. And maybe I step on another one and I was like, oh, suddenly I get this twisted, anxious sense in my gut. And I'm like, and all of that is meaningful. And we speak through it, and we speak to it, and then we see what else comes. And then Sam, while he's facilitating, will offer reflections and what he's experiencing himself as I'm standing on that marker, for example. Maybe we switch roles, and maybe he comes and stands on the marker, And then it's that whole process. It's fascinating. We're actually just about to introduce constellations into the course here at the school. So because we use it so much, we're like, why are we not helping our coaches develop this skill set? We love it. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. So that kind of process, I guess, is emerged as part of your course then as well. Really interesting to hear about the way you do it and how you do it. And it's interesting to find myself here in the interview, because I didn't think this is where we're going to be going. Before, I was thinking I was going to be going into the detail of, well, how did you build the course and what did you do with the content? But we find ourselves here, and I find it fascinating to hear you kind of talking about this process emerging in the treehouse and how it's kind of now developed into part of your course. I'm noticing we've got about 15 minutes left. So before we kind of wrap up, I wanted to just offer questions to Sachin and Lip, who might want to jump in and kind of ask you a few questions, Nathan.
Yeah, by all means, please.
Sachin looks like he's ready to go.
Yeah, man. First of all, Nathan, massive respect and thank you for sharing your journey. It will be very hard for me not to be inspired by what you just shared and how true it is to you. I don't really know you that well. I know stuff about you, but listening to how you've built this, it sounds so true to you, and you haven't compromised on who you are to create it. That is so awesome. I love it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I don't really have a question, man. I kind of just wanted to say, well, my question is, can we have a chat? Because we haven't, and I would love to.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be a pleasure. I'd love to.
Respect. I've got to go. I've got a phone call to take, but thank you so much, man. And I love what you're doing. I love what you're about. I love what you stand for, and everything you've described. I had an experience recently where I met some academics in the coaching space, and they were very dismissive of my style. And now listening to you speak, I'm like, like the academic side is not really, I don't really get down with it. And knowing that you're in the space doing what you're doing is beautiful, man, because I see that there's a lot of research, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of statistics, there's a lot of this is the right approach, and that's not substantiated by evidence and whatever. But what you're doing feels so aligned with what I believe. Thank you for being you and putting it here, because people need it.
Yeah, thank you, Sachin. I really appreciate it. And you might be happy to hear that actually, you may or may not be aware that nearly everything that not everything I've spoken about, like seeking guidance from maybe wherever, but this, these kind of processes, some of what I've spoken to has a lot of huge evidence base. Neurobiology speaks a lot to this, in body cognition, and sciences like this, they offer us actually, for those who we're speaking to, maybe come from that more logical, rational side and who want that or need that to kind of satiate that part of them. There's a lot of science emerging now. The latest research is really just kind of supporting a lot of these principles and practices that have been around for thousands of years, some of which, from Eastern philosophy, like we mentioned, Taoism or Buddhism or yogic traditions and practices. So it's a very exciting time to be alive. And thank you for your reflection session. I look forward to our conversation soon.
My brother, thank you.
Take it easy.
Peace.
Lip, jump in.
Oh, I'm fascinated, Nathan. What courage you have. Question is around, what is the size of an initial core group, and does that fluctuate? And we start with that.
Can I just check I understood your question correctly, Lip? Did you say what is the size of the initial cohort?
Yeah, no, the core group that you start to form your faculty, if you like. How is it, 3 people, 5 people? I just wonder.
Yeah. When you say the fact, so you mean internally, like the team, the Somatic School?
Yes, your team, yes.
Such an interesting question, Lip. So, training companies like the Somatic School or Animas notoriously have 10. Animas is has become quite a thing, but a lot of training or mastermind or mentoring or kind of like group coaching providers and things like that often have quite small teams. The way that I approached this was, and I think if I could offer any advice, it would be to do not procrastinate or delay or hesitate to hire when You have the resources to do so, and the timing feels right. Because with each new hire, I think, why the hell didn't I do this earlier? Because it relieves so much pressure every single time. You can't possibly do everything on your own, but for me, I did it with the funds I had, which was pretty much bootstrapping the business. So all I was spending on the business was what we were earning from the business. So therefore, I didn't have a lot of resources initially. When I say resources, I mean financial resources to put towards hiring stuff. So therefore, it necessitates me doing most of the jobs myself, which is fine and appropriate as well, because I think you don't want to let go of too many things too soon. Otherwise, things become a little messy before you understand what you're actually trying to build. It helps to be at the front line in it, engaging, so you actually know what you're trying to create and getting the live feedback from either botching a Facebook ad or like delivering a dodgy sales event, or doing something in the training space that didn't quite land. It helps to be there in the experience to really be able to get that experience to then refine and hone it, and treating each and every one of those experiences as feedback. So initially it was just me. The way I approached it was that each new hire was when it really felt like it was time, and whatever I was handing over was sufficiently understood by me such that I could delegate it out so that I could hand it over. I always think it's a little risky hiring someone to do something that you really know really nothing about, unless they're really good at what they do, in which case you're really going to pay for that as well. If somebody's an expert, you're going to pay a lot more for it. It tends to be better to kind of do it yourself, understand what to do, and then bring someone in at an entry level, which means they have a lower, they're less of an expense to the business at the early stages, which is appropriate, and then tell them what you need doing and allow them to learn from you, basically. So now today we have only 3 people in the core team, still 4 years on. That's me, that's Sam, who's our program lead. He's like the integrator in the organization. There's an interesting book called Rocket Fuel, talks about the concept of visionary and integrator. Having a visionary and an integrator in the company, and I'm certainly the visionary, and Sam steps into this integrator role very well, and currently he's our program lead, and so he kind of manages the operation side. And then we have a course consultant, and including myself, it's 4. So then we have a course consultant, and then we have an admin assistant and a finance manager, essentially. There's 4 people in the core team. But then on top of that, we have 9 trainers. I think it's 9. I'm not entirely sure. We have 9 trainers. So trainers are freelancers, yeah. And the reality is that what's the phrase that Nick often uses for that? That potential trainers are everywhere. You find trainers very easily. Everyone's keen to train. So obviously, it's about finding the right people. But the way that I found was really beautiful when you're thinking about creating a training course is that you bring trainers through who have actually done the course themselves. So somebody comes through your course, that first pilot, maybe there's 1 or 2 people who you really resonate with. You think, oh, they'd be great delivering this. And then you onboard them, slowly onboard them, do all that you need, have them observe we have them observe the course first, and then we have them co-facilitate for 2 intakes before they fly solo. So it's a slow onboarding process. And that's somebody who came through the course themselves. They don't necessarily work as a trainer or a facilitator, but those skills are easily trained in. We can easily help people develop that skill set, and hopefully they have a kind of basic competency in how they deliver and things like that, even if that's just natural competencies. And then trainers you can bring in quite early on. Actually, you don't even need many. You could just be you running the business and have more trainers delivering it. And one final thing I'll say here, I know this is a long answer to your question there, but I was very, very deliberate early on when I created the course that I didn't want to be the face of the company. I didn't want it to be the Nathan Blair show. And I certainly didn't want the course to be the case where it was only I that could train it. That would be a nightmare for me. Yeah. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't all about a personality, but it was about the principles and the content that we were training. And so therefore, It was really very easy because I built it in that way. When the time came, it was very easy to bring trainers in to deliver that content because it wasn't tied to me in any way.
Well, thank you for the answer. That's very helpful. So I like the slant you take it. That is the vision, is the work. Just one last thing. With the COVID restriction, how has it been for you? Because obviously it has to be live or not. I just wonder.
Such a good question again, because like so when COVID hit, get this. So just before COVID came, I was getting fully ready. Like, honestly, it was like, I was like set on this direction that we were going to become the coach training school that did everything in person. Yeah. All the other training schools were doing online training. We're like, no, we're all about in-person training. In-person training is where it's at. We believe in it very strongly. So all our trainings will be live and in person and nothing online. Yeah. Then COVID happened. So it's a classic example of best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. It's like life has plans for us, you know, and the thing in that moment was not to stay rigid to my plan, but to think about, well, what now? What happens? What's wanting to emerge from these conditions and from these circumstances? And what we landed on, obviously, needs must. We took a training that was happening in person, and halfway through, we transitioned it to online entirely. That course weren't particularly happy about it. The whole time they were very aware that it was an online experience. They weren't that happy about the experience. They wanted it to be in person. But after that, obviously the coronavirus didn't go anywhere. So we had to continue doing it online. And over time, we realized that I wanted to make sure that an online experience didn't lose the things that make an in-person experience special and powerful. And so we were absolutely determined to make online experiential training as close to an in-person experience as you possibly get, if not having certain advantages that you can only get online. So we pivoted completely and made the whole training entirely online. And then when we doubled down on that, so the American phrase, we kind of went all in on online, and basically we did everything we could to make sure that the online experience was the best online experience it could possibly be. I was like, we're going to have the best online training experience out there. And I believe that we've accomplished something close to that. I don't care if it's the best in the world or not. I don't care about that. But I really feel like it's you know, the online training experience. We hear people say that people go, you know, friends of our participants will say, you've got a whole weekend on Zoom this weekend coming up, you know, that sounds terrible, and they'll often say, yeah, it's actually not. We hear a lot of the time people say that when they arrive there, even though they've spent the whole week on Zoom, when they arrive in the morning, by the end of the weekend, by the end of the day on Sunday, they have more energy than they had when they came into the training space on Saturday morning. So it's a generative experience, and I think that's unusual today. So many people are doing Zoom calls. They often find it's depleting. And we do the polar opposite of that. Our online training is life-giving intentionally. It's didn't happen by accident. We were very, very deliberate, and it's a life-giving experience, basically. Yeah.
Can I just pick up one thing? You say you make the online special and use it to its advantage. Could you just elaborate on one or two of the special features of online?
Yeah, definitely. So here are some things that I believe that online training lends itself to that you can't experience in person. A couple of things. Yes. We're able to give our participants a 2-hour break for lunch. Now, 2 hours sounds like a long time if you've had to travel an hour and a half to get to your training. Right. And you get 2 hours, you know, out, and you're thinking, come on, I want to get my money's worth. But if people are already at the training space when they wake up, you know, essentially they wake up, they open their laptop, they're ready to go. 2 hours lunch break is incredible. It means they get to eat and go for a walk, spend time with the kids, take the dog for a walk, lie down for a bit. It makes such a big difference. There's a couple of other things as well, which I'd say are like things like the fact that facilitators and participants are all on the same screen in the same size box. It basically takes down this strange power dynamic and hierarchy that happens in a training space when you've got facilitators at the front of the room and all the participants looking in this direction at them. You know, people fall into these interesting dynamics when we're in spaces like that. It doesn't lend itself to a person-centered facilitative approach that we adopt at the Somatic School, which is basically where the trainers are not the only experts in the room. In fact, everyone in the group brings with them wisdom, experience, intelligence, and expertise that could be of value for all of us, including the facilitators. And so we like that kind of a little bit more of a flat space, at least at times, at least when facilitating discussions. The other thing I like about it is that there's something about being able to see everyone's faces at all times. That means that no one really gets missed. You know, if you're in a training space, if you're facing this way, you're talking to a participant over there, participants over here could be doing anything and they get missed. You know, maybe someone raises their hand, but then they think, oh, okay, I didn't get a chance to speak. You never know that because they were behind your back. But on Zoom, someone raises their hand and you miss them, or so somebody else jumps in, you can come back to that person very easily and everyone feels seen and heard and acknowledged all the time. There's lots of little things like that I just think if you lean into those aspects and then leverage those aspects of the Zoom space, you can actually create an experience around those that's special and actually supports the learning experience a lot. So little things like that. There are other things, but you know, we haven't got time.
Okay, thanks for that. One last thing. How about the absence of the touch element, of the neuroceptive element of the whole presence? How do you compensate for that?
Yeah, well, did you say the neuroceptive element?
Yeah, neuroceptive element of the whole presence of the people, and also the element of touch.
Yes, exactly, because they are two slightly separate things in my mind. So
they are two separate. Yeah.
So the touch aspect is easily. So we used to have it be that on the one module where physical contact is involved, that they would bring someone, a friend or family, and then they would bring them in the space and they would do it with them. We've since removed that, and now what we do is we actually offer innovative ways to work with contact where you don't need to be physically present. Now, it might sound a bit bizarre, but basically it involves participants coaching clients using self-touch as part of an intervention, or maybe concrete, contact with their environment. So getting concrete feedback, even if it's not us touching them. And those can all be trained online and practiced online, and they don't require you to be physically present in the room with your coaching clients. The neuroceptive part is something that we're super deliberate with. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what neuroception is essentially the perception of safety or danger. It's a sensory capability that we have that's scanning our environment and our space under the level of conscious awareness of cues of welcome and warning. Are we safe? And in an online setting, you can do a lot to create neuroception of safety. We do a lot of things, more than we can talk about now, but it's something that we're so nervous system conscious in our training that we believe that it's upstream from everything else. As someone called Deb Danner has this wonderful phrase, story follows state. Our autonomic state is upstream from our narrative about the world or ourselves or life. So that if we're not tending to the nervous system of our participants up front, upstream, then everything that comes after is, let's say everyone's stressed out, sympathetically activated. Let's say our trainer arrives late, and when they arrive late, they open up the Zoom room and there's like a dog barking really loud in the background, and then they realize they've forgotten something, so they say, "Oh, sorry, everyone, I just got to go do something," and everyone's feeling really like, "What's going on? I don't feel held. I don't feel safe here." You can't do good work after that. I mean, you can, but it's going to take a lot of rupture and repair to get you back on track. And so the reality is, all that we can do to create this neuroception of safety, first and foremost, it only aids everything that comes after. So learning is only supported by having that kind of awareness of the nervous system and where our participants are in terms of that autonomic state, and where we are as trainers in terms of our autonomic state, comes first and foremost at the school. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks so much. Great questions there. Awesome. Loved it.
Yeah, great questions, Lip. Thank you so much for them. I'm just conscious of your time, Nathan, also, but before we wrap up the recording for the listeners, I'd just like to mention I'll put the commitment quote in the comments section, and also the recording of the profound experience in the comment section, so people can see it for themselves. And before we kind of sign off, I'd be curious to find out, what advice would you give to your former self about creating a training program? You know, if you're going to give some brief overview or brief tips, shall we say?
Two things. I would say. I think the first, and obviously you can cut out that whole big pause. I think the first would be, and I'm just trying to feel into how to articulate this. I know, when in doubt, or when feeling like hesitant, questioning, anxious or scared about decision, etc., just when, like there's this phrase that says, when in doubt, don't. Just pause. And I would say, phone someone who you know is reliable in terms of offering support that's contextually relevant around this topic. I would say, pick up the phone when in doubt, or pause and take time to let the answer or the solution to emerge. Like haste and urgency are dangerous concepts in my books. When it comes to business, I think there is something about being decisive when the time calls for it, but I think there's something also about making decisions built on a certain level of conviction. Now it's getting a bit woolly. Let me see here. What am I trying to say? I know, to summarize, basically find your support network and utilize them regularly and often. I did that anyway, but I would still say that to myself. The second thing is keep an eye on the finances. So a business is only as healthy as its financials. Truth be told, you can't do anything without money in a business. And if you don't have money coming into a business, it is stressful. It's so stressful. The reality is that no matter how much your business is earning, it doesn't have to be stressful, even if that's a meager amount, as long as you're managing those financials well. So it's not about how much you have in the business account. It's about how you're managing those and how consciously you're doing that. I think you get into a lot of trouble in business by not knowing your numbers, making decisions without first consulting your figures. And that's what I'll say. I would definitely tell myself that, because the only time we've ever had a truly stressful period is when the finances were all out of whack in the Somatic School. And that was simply because I just hadn't been keeping an eye on it. I hadn't been educating myself in how to manage business accounts. It's a whole different realm to your personal accounts. There's lots of things to take into consideration. I didn't know how to read a P&L. I didn't know what my balance sheet meant. I didn't know how to create a cash flow forecast. These things are essential. No matter how much I run a spiritually kind of founded and divinely guided and emergent and sensing and respond business, there are certain things that are the masculine counterpart to that, which are like things like your figures, your numbers. You can't escape the reality that life is a balance of these things. Those things create the containment, the structure, the foundation upon which all your wonderful, creative, intuitive, and feminine projects can grow and blossom harmoniously. But it has to be built on that foundation, that solid foundation of clear figures and finances. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Love that. Thank you so much, Nathan. And yeah, it was a bit of a tough question for me to ask for 4 years of wisdom distilled into kind of a 3-minute answer, but I really appreciate it. And I've loved asking you questions. I've really enjoyed your answers. I found them super interesting. I'd love to keep going, but we're gonna have to pause there. So if anyone wants to kind of find Nathan after today, they can find you, I guess, at the Somatic Coaching School and on LinkedIn. Is there anywhere else that might be useful for them to kind of?
Well, first of all, let me tell you what the actual website is called. It's www.thesomaticschool.com. thesomaticschool.com. So yeah, that would be the best place to find out. It's the website. The intro event, I would say, is the best way to come and get a feel for it. So if you're curious, you'll learn more from the intro event than you will from browsing the website. Of course, there's a lot more context and detail as well as background. So for that, it's the same website / I think you're going to share it. It's introduction evening, if I'm not mistaken. I'm actually not entirely sure now. And they happen every week or two. And so they happen regularly. So, have a look on the website for dates. And that's probably the best way to learn more. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nathan.
Yeah,
Thank
my
you.
pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Wow, very, very inspiring.
Thank you for all your questions. They were wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brucey.